So before the game start, I want to talk about the deck I'm going to be playing today. It is Blue-Red Prowess. This version actually has a little bit of black in it, so you can call it Blue-Red Prowess, you can call it Grixis Prowess. I'm calling it Blue-Red Prowess just because it's essentially the Blue-Red Prowess deck that people are accustomed to, though it does have 2 copies of Colligan's Command in the main deck, and then a couple of Duresses and Self-Inflicted Wounds in the board. And I like what the black adds. It's pretty much a free splash because we're playing Smoldering Marsh and Sunken Hollow anyways, and we don't need the black for Colligan's Command until turn 3, so it's pretty nice. This is a deck that I played a reasonable amount with. It's similar to Blue-Red Delver. If you flash back to when Treasure Cruise was legal in Modern, Blue-Red Delver was a lot of people considered the best deck in Modern at that time, and Treasure Cruise was a big part of that. We've got a bunch of 1-mana non-creature spells, and some of them are cantrips, actually, like Slip Through Space and Expedite are just great. Give you a Prowess trigger, you draw a card, you make your guy bigger. Sometimes the effect is nice, like giving a guy haste or making it unblockable. Other times just filling up the graveyard for a Treasure Cruise or in order to flip a Jace is just good enough. Just 1 mana, draw a card. It's exactly what this deck wants to be doing. The mana base is straightforward, which is something that I really like about this deck. It's a 2-color deck, unlike a lot of archetypes in the format. And so we've got good mana, right? We've got our 4 Shivan Reefs. We only need to play 2 of the battle lands, and then we've just got a host of fetches and duels, or fetches and basics, I should say. And you really just want to get 2 blue and 2 red each game. There will be times where you only have access to 1 blue or 1 red potentially, and that's a little bit frustrating when you draw the wrong sequence of fetches and basics. But the true reason why I'm drawn to this deck, I would say, is that while it's not a Tarka Red, we're still playing a similar game. I like attacking with creatures, and we've got Titan Strength, 4 copies of Titan Strength, and then 3 copies of Temur Battle Rage. So we've still got our combo finish. There's so many non-creature spells in the deck that Temur Battle Rage is just simply a good card. Like, you don't need a bunch of pump spells, you don't need Become Immense in order for this to just win games. Like, you play a Slip Through Space, maybe you play a Treasure Cruise, or something else. Maybe you have a Titan Strength, maybe you don't. But, you make your guy 4 power pretty easily, and you get in maybe the last 8 or 10 damage normally with the Temur Battle Rage. And there's 3 copies in the deck, which I like. You don't really want to have 2, but 1 is great. The first one's great. The second one is kind of whatever. And then we've got some removal spells. We're not really trying to disrupt our opponent too much, but the nice cheap removal like Wild Slash and Fiery Impulse is where we want to be because we're trying to win pretty quickly. So 1 mana to get rid of an opposing creature early is more important than trying to clog up our hand with expensive removal spells. We're not really worried about big creatures. We have evasion with Storm Chaser Mage, or we can go Slip Through Space, make our guy unblockable. You're not going to be blocking anyways. And that's worked out pretty well for me. I will say that yes, this deck plays 4 copies of Jace. In some ways, I wish it didn't, just because Jace is definitely a pricey card in Standard, and a lot of decks do play it, but Jace is just so good, especially with so many non-creature spells you can flash back. It's just so hard not to play Jace, so there are 4 Jaces, and 4 copies of Abbot of Carol Keep, just the best 2-mana red creature in Standard. I'm going to go ahead and say that, although in this deck it will compete with Storm Chaser Mage for being the best creature. Both of them have Prowess, and we've got, of course, got 4 copies of Monastery Swiftspear. So there's 12 Prowess threats, 12 Prowess creatures, plus the 4 copies of Jace, and that's it as far as creatures. We can't really afford to play more creatures than that. because we want to keep our density of non-creature spells very high in order to help fuel Prowess, to help fuel Delve early on in the game. And kind of our big non-creature spells here are the Colligan's Commands and the Treasure Cruises to kind of help us gas back up if we've kind of got a land-heavy draw or need a way to refuel. Treasure Cruise is best, but I like the Colligan's Command to be able to re-buy one of the Prowess creatures if our opponent does have access to removal for them. And then moving on to the sideboard, we've made more use of the Black Splash, as I already mentioned. Specifically, Self-Inflicted Wound is a nice cheap removal against the green and white decks. Like to be able to kill maybe an Anafenza, maybe even just a Sylvan Advocate, whatever it may be. Plus, you get the 2 life is relevant for this deck. We know how good Self-Inflicted Wound is in Standard at this point, and this deck really makes use of it fully. And then we've got 3 copies of Roast as well. So just kind of going towards cheap removal and cheap cards in general is kind of this deck's plan. There are 2 Outpost Sieges so that we can play more of an attrition game against a control deck with a lot of removal. We can board in those Outpost Sieges, and they've been pretty impressive. If you stick one and your opponent doesn't have much pressure on you, you're very, very favored to win that game. And then outside of those cards, we've got 5 counterspells: Dispels, Negate, Disdainful Stroke. Some of them are interchangeable. Normally I find against a lot of decks we want to be boarding in 1 counterspell. Sometimes you want to board in all of them. The reason why there aren't any counterspells in the main deck is they don't really work that well with cards like Abbott. Like, you don't want to be flipping a counterspell. You also don't really want to be you don't really want to be casting them early and holding up mana for them. You just want to be playing your threats, and they also don't really help with the Prowess triggers very often or with the Delve. So that's why they're in the sideboard. We can board them in and become a little bit more of reactive and controlling deck after sideboard, but I don't like main decking them, and I'm ready to get going. So let's see how this deck plays out.